misleading content out there. So it's a mix of truth and facts. It's not completely false. It's not entirely made up, but it is manipulative, and it does provide the public with inaccurate information to a degree. So these ratings are the ratings which actually point to a more subtle ways of manipulation, and these are also very, very present in the sample. The types of media outlets that we use the categorization that we made of our own. Clearly, the anonymous websites are by far the most dominant, so they are the ones that got the most ratings, meaning that they produce the most disinformation in this 1 year time, as a type, as a media type, not as individual outlets. That's very important to notice. So when you put them all together, they are the biggest source, the biggest redistributor, generally the biggest disinformer on the web. Then online media, what we call online media, is a media that doesn't have any other type of media outlets, it's like just the website. And commercial media, regular media with I don't know, a press and I don't know, a TV channel and the website, etc. So a mix of different formats. And the thing that is really worrying is that the publicly owned media, public news agencies, commercial news agencies as well, appear in the sample. The numbers are small, but the numbers of those media outlets are small, so they're all there, basically. There is not a single news agency, for example, in the region that has not been rated at least once for publishing disinformation in the political spheres, which is really, really worrying, because these are the services that other media use, expecting, accuracy, paying for that, and then they get something that they cannot be sure of if it's true or not. The anonymous websites that you saw in that really tall column are usually parts of something that we call portal farms. So this is a very complex network that they form. They use several usually it's Facebook pages and groups, several web domains, and they use it to multiply the reach, to amplify the reach to their readers. So what they would do is, for example, they would buy a Facebook page called, I don't know, Grandma's Recipes for Cookies. And then all the people who wanted to read about recipes for cookies would suddenly be exposed to a single website or a pair of websites that are connected in this network. And this infrastructure, so to speak, that has been formed through these general interest Facebook pages is at some point used to get people to click on these websites and, of course, to bring revenue from ads to their owners. The most troubling thing is that this is the type of media that publishes the most disinformation. So the quality of information that people get through these portal farms is horrendous in general. And in Bosnia, this is something also that we discovered, that they are especially present here. At this point, we have over 1,000 media outlets. Most of those are anonymous websites from Bosnia. So we figured out that it's not the case in the neighboring countries. It's not the case wherever we looked. It's just really, really present here, because this is the way for people where they can really, it's hard to find employment, it's hard to find a job, and then they do this to make money, basically. So it's like an economic effort. It's not a part of any kind of political agenda. It's the way for them to make a living, basically. We have one example, which is a portal called Novi. It's a kind of a liminal case. It's somewhere between anonymous website and a website that has some data on its ownership information. They use 58, this was actually when we finished the research, it was 58. Now it's over 80, I think, Facebook pages. And all of them combined at the point where there was 58 were followed by 6,600,000 people in a country which has less than 4 million people. So their numbers are really, really terrifying, considering what content they publish. The media in the sample, most of them are located in Bosnia, which it makes sense because we are focused on Bosnia when we do our fact-checking. But because we track all the redistributions, a lot of media from other countries also get into the sample, because they do this a lot. They take stuff from each other and republish it. 140 media were those anonymous media where we could not track their location. We couldn't, any of the indicators that we used wouldn't give us enough information where these people are who run the website. But there's also 100 media from the neighboring countries, from the region. And that is something that was really striking for us, because again, we are mostly focused on content about Bosnia or coming from Bosnia. Still, there is 100 media outlets, and most of them are from Serbia. which intensively publish disinformation that in some way pertains to Bosnia. As I said, anonymous media anonymous websites, they're not really media, are the type of media which publishes the most disinformation. But when it comes to individual outlets, again, it's really worrying that the ranking champion that no one comes close to is a public television from Bosnian entity Republika Srpska, RTRS, which stands out really sharply from all other media in the sample. And the second one is Srna, which is also a public news agency, and Alternativna is really closely connected to them. These are basically televisions which are really centered around one political party, that's the ruling party in Republika Srpska, SNSD, and that kind of continue to peddle their narrative through disinformation, among other things. When we look at those websites outside of Bosnia, as I said, most are from Serbia, and top 10 ranked are all from Serbia. When we go into 20 top ranked, there are 2 from Croatia appearing. But again, Serbia completely dominates the sample. Another thing that we did is we went to see who are the targets of this information, when is manipulation used to portray someone in a bad light, and when is it used to benefit someone. So who are the beneficiaries and targets of this information in the sample? And we found that most of them are targets, which is kind of, expected. So most of the articles actors appearing in the sample are those who are targeted, who are kind of slandered in a way through disinformation. And when it comes to outside actors, which could be more interesting for international audience, when we look into countries, United States of America is without, without the top kind of slandered country through political disinformation in the region, and which you can see by comparing the positive and the negative mentions in the sample. And Serbia also appears really often in the content of political disinformation. And when it comes to individuals from outside of Bosnia who appear in the sample, Donald Trump is, again, really stands out. He appears a lot, and he mostly appears in a positive way. So he's mostly an actor who benefits from disinformation, not an actor who is targeted by disinformation. And it's really interesting when you compare where US as a country ranks and where Donald Trump ranks, or I don't know, Devin Nunes, who is another Republican that appears here. If anyone is interested why, we can talk about that later. When you compare that to the way that the former American administration has been portrayed and the members of the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, who are mostly or exclusively portrayed in a negative light. So you can see that there is a pattern in these texts, in this disinformation that's published here. The European Union as such appears not to be that interesting for people who produce disinformation as the United States or individual countries. So it appears in a neutral or a positive framing in most of the time. When it appears in a negative context, it's either through conspiracy theories, again peddled by these media mostly from RS, about, I don't know, intelligence services planning a coup in Republika Srpska, or even assassination of Milorad Dodik, who's the president of SNSD, this party I mentioned, etc. So this is what happens. Or they try to represent enlargement, fatigue, or skepticism in a more exaggerated way than it's really present in the European Union. But even in those texts, no one kind of questions that the membership in the EU is a strategic goal in the region. We haven't come across any of those examples. And there's a second type of negative appearances is when you, stuff like this, the rainbow flag that you see here, is presented as a huge threat to local cultures, etc. So human rights values, European values, women's rights, LGBT rights, etc. are often connected to the EU in the sample and presented as a negative thing. And when it appears in a positive way, it's usually fake good news, which is interesting. Does not appear a lot about any other topic. So it's something like the EU has signaled that we're going to, I don't know, enter the EU in whatever, 2022, for example. Or there's good news about visa cancellations in Germany, so anyone who wants to work there can go there freely, doesn't have to go through any kind of process. So that's the type of positive mentions that we find. And it's interesting that a lot of them are related to economic migrations, which are a huge problem in Bosnia because a lot of people are leaving, again, for lack of jobs and security. And now to look into what the algorithms have produced from our samples. The first sort of level of analysis that we did is we tried looking for pairs of media which are frequently publishing the same disinformation in pairs. And because the database is huge and all the connections would give more than 500,000, pairs, we only limited that to top 50 publishers of disinformation. And this is what we got. We got RTRS again in the center with a huge number of connections. And I don't know if you can see sort of. So the color of the line indicates the strength of the association. If the line is gray, it means that they publish the same disinformation less than 4 times. If it's blue, it's from 4 to 7? 4 to 6? Oh, sorry, 4 to 6 is the gray line, 7 to 10 is the blue line, and over 11 is the red line. So RTRS has the highest number of connections, and it has the highest number of strong connections. So it acts as a source and a redistributor of this information, like in every possible way, really, really intense. I think the overall number of connections for RTRS is 16 here. And Sputnik is the second highest, the media with the second highest number of these sort of connections, which is really interesting because this is the only media that is a state-owned media in the sample that is not owned by any of the local states. So Sputnik is a media outlet in the ownership of the government of the Russian Federation. And it appears here for the first time as like a really, really significant actor in the sample, so to say. When we did the more complex count, I'm not really proficient in data science, but I call it that, of these associations between the media. So we told the algorithm, so now let's not do pairs, let's do groups. Let's do at least 3 media which publish the same disinformation at least 3 times, for example, and give us 50 best rules, so 50 strongest connections that you can locate in the sample using these parameters that we input inside. And this is what we get. We get a really complex web of media which don't only publish the same information incidentally, which do it as a rule, they do it continuously, and they do it like intensely. And what's really interesting here, and what was also present in the first network that you saw to a degree, is that anonymous media somehow seem to disappear from this sample. So they dominate the overall mass of disinformation that's produced online. But when you look for strong connections, when you look for regularities and rules, they're almost not there anymore. And this gives you like an evidence that they are opportunist disinformers, so to speak. They do it for profit that they can make on Google AdSense. But these media, they do it continuously, and they do it clearly with an intention. It's not a coincidence that they do it. So what we did with this 5, okay, what we did is we kind of placed them geographically where they're located. Most of them are located in Serbia, which is again very interesting. Out of 29 of these media, 15 are not in Bosnia at all. 15 are in Serbia, and 4 are in Bosnia. Out of those 14, 12 are in Republika Srpska. So this means that there's like a hub that kind of goes between Serbia and Republika Srpska, and that is the only really strong like disinformation network that we could find in a sample which has all of these media, but these are the ones which remain. And now, do I have time for this at all? 2 kind of case studies of what type of content is produced by this hub. So there was a statement, a really racist statement attributed falsely to Noam Chomsky, saying that he called Albanians a wild tribe who were ungrateful to Serbs in Kosovo for welcoming them to their territory, something like that. And it was claimed that he published this in Foreign Affairs, and he did not. And this was how this news traveled. So Informer, it's like a tabloid from Serbia, really connected to the local government, was the one who published it first, and then it went like this. So the blue ones are from Serbia, and the red ones are from Bosnia. So that's how that traveled. And there's another one. I think we all deserve to look at Denzel for a while, after all this depressing stuff. The statement was attributed to Denzel Washington, saying that he praised Trump and said that he saved the US from war with Russia and from becoming an authoritarian police state. Of course, he never said any such thing. And it was huge in this network, but mostly in Serbia. So most of the media which wrote about that were there. And then Sputnik Serbia, the local Sputnik in local language, did another, took another step. They took the made-up statement and then analyzed it. They asked for opinions from pundits and political analysts and journalists, etc. So they created a whole story about nothing. Also found a way to insert Morgan Freeman, who at those days spoke about Srebrenica, so he was the villain in the story, and Denzel Washington was like a good guy in the story, and they called it, this is not seen well, Denzel versus Morgan Hollywood War because of Russia and Serbia. So nothing of that, none of that ever happened, but this was the headline and the front page on Sputnik that day. And Sputnik in itself is really interesting because most of you are familiar with it, and unlike the local media that I mentioned, they appear as one of the main connectors in that hub that you saw, like geographically located. They have the second highest number of links in pairs. They have second highest number of links between Bosnian and Serbian media. So they kind of act like a link between media from Serbia and media from Bosnia who spread this information, most strongly through their connection with RTRS, the public television in Republika Srpska. And we rated it 36 times for 16 articles which contained this information. But we also did analysis without ratings where hundreds of articles were present. We just didn't fact check them for bias. And the bias in these articles was really, really strong, and it was really unprofessional reporting. So the real presence is higher than what you saw. And this is an example of an individual cluster where we can see that all the media that appear in Sputnik's individual cluster, so its most frequent partners in this information, are the media from the main hub, which also indicates really, really strong connections. And they're also tightly connected among themselves. Sputnik, as you can see, has a really fast growth on social media, which is unlike other news agencies who are not really that proficient in using social media. Sputnik is like a hybrid, acts as a hybrid type of media in terms of how it uses the internet. And it does it much better than most of other media who are not anonymous do it. So, how much time do I have now? No, I have no time. So this is our research was limited, obviously, by the content that we produced in a year and how to say, we just took our sample and did what we could with it. But it could be taken further. I'm not going to go into this. This is more important. It could be taken further. It could be used to the methodology. If you track the sources and the redistribution and apply these algorithms, you can learn about a lot of things this way. You can learn, for example, which media from abroad are used as frequent sources here. I know two. The Denzel story came from something called Your Newswire. Daily Mail from UK, for example, is a frequent source that's quoted here, not in the political context, usually in the pseudoscience context. So this is something that you could actually examine by using this methodology. You can also apply it to countries in the region or outside of the region. You can apply it to compare the media scenes between countries. You can explore specific topics in how they appear in different languages. Who takes what from whom? Does it happen regularly? Does it happen in groups or in pairs, etc.? So if you apply it with a sample that has one of these things as its baseline, you can really do you can learn a lot of stuff about how this information online travels, how it's used, who is used by, who is it used by. And that's the last thing that's on this slide, which is all these things, which in our case remain mostly online, can be a starting point for real good investigative journalism stories. So financial ties, political ties, organizational ties between these media, between the political actors who appear in the sample, between their financiers, etc., are something that we cannot explore it. It goes well beyond our scope of work, but it could be done by investigative journalists, and we really, really hope that it will. And that is it. Did I go over? Thank you.
Thank you. It was almost on time, so great. Now I'm going to invite a great bunch of our regional partners and to join us on stage to discuss further the issue and to expand it more outside of Bosnia a little bit. So first of all, Marija Vučić from Raskrikavanje. So it's not Raskrinkavanje, it's Raskrikavanje from Serbia. Please. Then Milica Kovačević, Raskrinkavanje MI Montenegro, sorry. Please. Rosana Alesovska from Macedonia, not raskrinkavanje, but F2N2 Macedonia. Did I say it right? Yeah. North Macedonia. Sorry. I didn't prepare for this. And then finally, Ilir Gashi from Serbia, author of something really interesting, which we're gonna watch later on. So, thank you. Okay, super. After hearing like the talk about disinformation in Bosnia, I mean, it wasn't obviously just about Bosnia because like it was a way, but like the topics were more Bosnian because that's how the methodology of raskrinkavanje works. I want to open the stage by asking Maria first because you are the oldest, like, you know, apart from us, we kind of started together. How do you feel about the research? Do you see similar patterns in Serbia? What are the similarities? What are the differences? Basically, like, you know, whatever you want to look back on the research and talk about your context and the experiences you have in raskrinkavanje in Serbia. Thank you.
First of all, I have to say that I feel a little bit ashamed because so much of fake news circulating in Bosnia actually comes from Serbia, so we are kind of making a problem for you guys. I don't know why I feel like that because I'm actually trying to fight those fake news, but I was focused on differences more than similarities, and I believe that there are some huge differences between fake news situation in Serbia and in Bosnia. First of all, as I realized that you have a problem with anonymous websites. There are many of them, thousands of them. Those are media outlets that exist mainly for profit, clicks. I think that in Serbia we don't have a big problem with those anonymous websites. Of course, they do exist. But our main problem is traditional mainstream media outlets, tabloids and tabloid TV stations, which are the most popular, the most read, the most watched media outlets in Serbia. And they are actually functioning as a kind of media machinery supported and in a way maybe run by people from the ruling party, from the government, etc. So we in raskrinkavanje, we are mainly focused on political articles about politics. There is no so much clickbait headlines in those in politics, but there is almost every single article that we have debunked until now is a pure propaganda. Every single article is basically biased reporting. I saw that biased reporting in Bosnia is not high on that level. It's in the middle. In Serbia, everything is biased because media is. There is a strong division in media between those who are supporting the government and actually working for them, creating that discourse that actually please those ones who are in power, and very few of them who are trying to be independent or are oppositional. So I think that's the main difference in those countries. Actually, we have problem with fake news that come from pro-government media, which are at the same time most popular media, newspapers, television, blah blah blah, that are actually mainstream traditional media, and that create like strongly every day creating public opinion, doing the constant brainwashing in Serbia.
Thank you. Let's move over a little bit to Montenegro. Montenegro, Raskrinkavanje was like the third one to start kind of regionally, and you know you're still fresh, just a couple of months of work on this information. So what are your takes on the research, on the state of this information in Montenegro? How do you see it? Do you see similarities, differences? Similar question.
Yeah. The difference in approach is that we are working only analyzing this information in the areas of security, foreign policy, and regional relations, because we are new, and that was to fit our capacities. And from that, I find a lot of similarities, especially the fact that our experience is that Montenegro is a media colony. We have a huge presence of media in the border of the media market is not the state border, it's the border of our language. So we have this same problem with a lot of disinformation coming from Serbian media and from right-wing portals and from tabloids. The difference that I've noticed is I'm really surprised with the public broadcaster leading in disinformation. Our experience in Montenegro is that main proliferators of media manipulations are online media, so news portals. And we don't find frequently fake news or manipulations in printed media or on mainstream TV channels. In our experience, this is because these traditional media still have traditional editors. You still have an editor-in-chief and an editor and journalist that actually signs the piece. Maybe situation would be a little bit different if we analyzed internal politics. But generally, I'm surprised that so much disinformation come to the news programs of the public broadcaster or of a TV channel at all. Because in Montenegro, it looks like these false news are filtered through the day. You know, they are not in rush to publish, and they don't have too much space. It's only half an hour news program, so they don't have space actually to put everything in it. Also, we haven't discovered this size of these portals and farms of portals, but we also recognize two groups of media that are producing and distributing manipulations with many intersections between them. But one group is doing that from the ideological reasons. It is obviously, you know, promoting some politics, and you have probably them mapped on this Sputnik side of the world, and the other group is opportunist, like Tiana mentioned. So they are just chasing profit. It's for clicks. And in this group, unfortunately, we have some media that tend to be serious, but in the speed, under the pressure of timing, of no news in such a small society like Montenegro, when you have to publish news every 5 minutes on a web portal, they are making a lot of mistakes, and they are sometimes unwillingly participating in spreading this information to the widest audiences.
Oh, thank you. So now over to North Macedonia. I did it right this time. you just started basically, like, you know, I mean, there's been a lot of preparations. I mean, when we say in Bosnia we started in November 2017, that means we started way back in 2016. But, you know, and I know it's the same thing for all the countries here. But like Macedonia, you've been kind of like, you know, doing this work in Macedonia really shortly, and like, you know, I just kind of want to see the first like impressions. What do you feel? How do you feel about it? What happens? What are your first takes on this information in Macedonia? Please, Rosanna.
Thank you, Darko. So, as you said, we started the project in November. Okay. In November 2018, but a website was launched at the end of March this year. What we try to do is to focus on the topics. We have, and we maintain the database like you have, but this is a topic-based, and this is the first aspect, how we are monitoring and seeing the things. And the second aspect is the time. So whenever there is an important event or a political happening or whatever, we try to see what are the disinformation and narratives that are appearing around these dates. The first big issue on which we have been working is the implementation of the PRESPA agreement, and it's the most important issue and topic in the country. And of course, with that, the disinformation narratives that are appearing around the country's Euro-Atlantic integration. We also go a little bit further, and we create stories about the disinformation narratives, because we have learned that the disinformation which are finding their way to the people are repeated. For example, every month there is at least one piece of article that is anti-NATO, and always the word radioactive is mentioned. So these stories are created by using statements which are dated 19 or 17 years ago, and they are compiled in a story, and when people read it, it turns out that this is something that is valid for now. So when we start to debunk the stories, simply we have a challenge what to debunk. So this combination of facts, half-truth, we have them as you have here in Bosnia. Now I will just ask your colleague to put the link on the screen, and this is our last story that you can find on the website, where you can see a completely fake news that our minister that our Minister of Foreign Affairs, after he changed the name of the country, will leave the country, and he will leave to work in US. And of course, this is completely false news, but it was published on several websites. And what is important, can you please go down, is how this news was spread on the social media. 80% of the people in Macedonia says that they receive their information about the political news from the TV stations, but very high percent says that they get informed from internet, and this percentage is around 40%. And I think that Macedonia is a little bit different from the countries in the region. Here now on the screen, to go back to the stories, you will see that once the news was published on the portals, immediately went from the portals to a Facebook pages, right? And their number is huge. Like on the first, in the first wave, there is one portal which shared the news on 17 groups. But what is important is that from this group, it was shared on another 34 Facebook pages. So the outreach to the people is huge. After that, some of them published the denial that was out there from the ministry and from Brookings Institute. They did it, but the damage that is done, I don't know how can we actually measure, but it's concerning what is happening on internet. For now.
Now off to Ilir. Ilir, you've been also around for a while, and like, you know, this is you've been doing different things, and like, you know, and out of which, like, this is kind of also a thing that you've been doing recently. How do you like? And you've been around the region also, so you know, I want to kind of extend the question to you about the state of disinformation in Serbia, but I guess you can also kind of, like, you know, get into the region if you want, basically.
Thanks, Darko. First, I want to congratulate you guys for doing such an amazing research. It seems methodologically robust, and the results, the findings are, I think, very important. And I'm hoping that someone in Serbia will pick it up as soon as possible, because it's giving a whole new dimension to the work of Serbian media. And it would be very interesting to try and understand the connection between the reporting of Serbian media that's present in the media sphere in Bosnia to political agenda of different political streams in Serbia. But going back to your question, when I first read the executive summary of the research, I noted that there is Great Britain as one of the countries coming up as being the most slandered, yes. And then I thought for a second, why is that the case? And then I remembered that in Serbia, for instance, ever since the 90s, and even much before that time, there is a picture of Great Britain as an enemy. Even though it was an ally in both the First World War and the Second World War, there has still been a surge of conspiracy theories about the role of Great Britain. And I was thinking about, you know, are we actually fighting fake news themselves or something else? And to go back to Serbia, as some of you might know, in 1999 there has been a NATO bombing of Serbia over a Kosovo conflict, or ethnical cleansing of Albanians in Kosovo. And RTS, the national television of Serbia, reported at the very beginning of the bombing that this NATO action started under the official name of the Merciful Angel. And this name really reflected the cynicism of the humanitarian intervention, or it was at least how we saw it. You know, they're like saying that they want to defend Albanian people, but they're killing people and they're destroying the country, and they're calling it Merciful Angel. The only problem with this is that it's fake news. This action has never been called Merciful Angel. Its official name is Operation Allied Force. However, still, 20 years later, on 24th of March, which is the anniversary of the bombing, most Serbian media will publish still that this was the name of the action. And the reason for this is exactly the fact that we are not fighting fake news itself. Because you can go to any of the recordings of NATO press conferences from the time, and you will never ever find this expression being used. The reason why is this the case is because fake news work well when they sit well with narratives that exist and have existed from many years before. And that's the real problem. It's like anti-Semitism theories, conspiracy theories. Like there have been theories about Jews poisoning wells since early Middle Ages. And these theories, dressed up as news, would come up every several decades, every several centuries. Whenever there was a need for a scapegoat, those would be the Jews. And what happened? Well, they poisoned the wells. So when we are thinking about confronting fake news, we must stop and think that we are not fighting the disinformation itself. It's not about the information being true or false. It's about the narrative that's beneath the surface of the sea. It's like top of the iceberg and what happens underneath. So most of the fake news in Serbia, and I believe it's the case in Bosnia, basically relate to things that have been circulating around for very clearly defined political agendas. And that's what also makes them so difficult to fight, because people tend to believe in them. And yeah, that's what I tried to make as a point. Thank you.
I mean, a very good point. I have more questions on my side, but like, you know, I would gladly open it up, like even now, if somebody has questions from the audience at this point. And we've been taking a long time so far. So are there any? Good, great, thank you. Because I have like, actually I want to cross over from what Ilir was talking about. My question would be like to all of you, and then you can, like, you know, maybe start with you, because you haven't been speaking on the panel so far. I get like what Ilir is talking, and I'm kind of like, you know, thinking what is the best way to go about this. Like, you know, is the best way actually going after the narratives? Is it the ideological fight that you need to do? Is it the going after individual media and trying to understand the schemes and the connections that we showed? Is it going after every single piece of narrative? Is it going after every single piece of reporting? Like, you know, what's the, I mean, probably the answer is all of the above, but like, don't give me that as an answer. Try to kind of like, you know, think more about like what is the right way to go about this, like in any case, in any way that you can.
I don't know. Next. So no, I'm kidding. Is this working properly? The things that you mentioned are very clear, to just like follow up a little bit from the research, and I haven't had a lot of time to go into that, but these are all, not all, but most of these are narratives which are rooted mostly in the wartime period of the 90s, and now they're just like resurrected and repackaged and reused over and over again. This is the threatening West against the Balkans, threatening West against certain ethnic groups, mostly the Serbs. It's mostly the Serbs who appear as kind of a perceived target of these conspiracies, etc. It's also very interesting when you look at the actors. Like, there's no negatively portrayed actors from Russia. There's a bunch of negatively portrayed actors from the West. So there's also this narrative, West versus East, like the reliving of the Cold War thing, which did not look like that actually during the Cold War in Yugoslavia. That's also very interesting. It's repacked completely now. So yes, it's all in there, and it's really hard to answer the question like how do you go against it, because if you see that there's like a super tangled web of media, some of which are public media, and it's not they're overburdened with work and they don't have time or good editors. No, they have been hijacked by you know, the political party that's in power, and now they're just like reduced to a propaganda outlet. So it's really hard when you have that. It's impenetrable. You cannot do anything. Like, before we publish any of these analyses, we contact all of these, the ones that have impressums and that like have names and surnames on the website. And we tell them this is false. We found that this is false. Or if we don't know yet if it's false, we ask them, like, what's your source for this? Where did you get this information? And you can see by their replies who wants to make news, who wants to make like good reporting, and who actually wants to do journalism, and who wants to do disinformation campaigns. And these tangled media are the ones who are clearly doing disinformation campaigns. You cannot touch them. You cannot change their mind. So they're being used by someone to do something. And how do you counter that? that's really like a super hard question to answer. You can try using things like, trying to reach people directly via social networks and all the tools that are available on online media. We are kind of succeeding in this with what we do, because real, like, very small outlet that cannot like match with any of these. But if you had more of that, if you had more of like someone who consciously goes out there and says, okay, so now what you've been seeing for the past 2 days is false, and then distributes this information to a lot of people, that's a first step. It's not enough. It's not the final step, but that's a first step. But generally, if you want this to be better or to change, you need to liberate the media from political influence. That's the only way, to a possible extent, because you cannot do it all the way. I mean, we know that some anonymous websites are created by this same political party and used, and you cannot stop that. I mean, they're going to do it. But at least, like, if a public broadcast service and a public news agency can be decontaminated from fake news, that would be a huge step. Here, at least, I'm speaking from local experience. When you look at like the whole region, or go even like further, like wider globally, then it does really become much, much more complicated. So I'll stop now.
The thing is that, well, civil society, we can't do this thing on our own. I mean, it's really important that we are exposing this, analyzing, identifying, exposing these narratives, but at least for Montenegro, but I'm sure that the situation is not different in the rest of the region. Polls are showing that people will keep listening to that same media, because they also want to hear that. These audiences are already really divided, so there is a need for intervention from other sectors. And I just want to emphasize that it's really necessary, because these narratives are extremely important. Like Tiana mentioned opinions about foreign policy and countries. In Montenegro, for example, recently, after we joined NATO, we are noticing that disinformation against the United States and NATO is in decrease, and now new target is Scandinavia, European Union, so it's going really after, what is the values that we as society should be following. Secondly, we are noticing really dangerous narratives that are playing on the ethnic divisions, and in the history of this region, I could freely say that we are seeing day by day promotion of the fear and hate against Albanian people, through the narrative of greater natural Albania and so on and so on. And it will come back to us as, if you are feeding, if you are poisoning the audience every day with that. That's why I think that there should be, and I'm saying this really carefully, that should be initiative by the state, by the government. There are good examples in Scandinavia, and of countries developing strategies that include changes of legislation, of policies, media literacy, and so on and so on. I'm quite aware where we are, and that, allowing government to go further in regulating media can lead to the opposite, but we really have to find some language with them. Also, this being a regional problem of our language, I'm wondering, they are meeting all the time. Do they even mention this, in these bled forums and things like that? Do they talk? Because this also can be part of some regional development or initiative. And finally, this cannot be fought without media. Montenegro doesn't have self-regulation at all, doesn't have functional self-regulation. I know many people working in media, I know honest journalists and honest editors, and I know that if there is some kind of regulation, that they would raise their voice against these things, and that functional self-regulation would do some filtering, some, I don't know, Novi Ba, or this profile of media will be outed by the media community as you are not media, you're just a website, you are a website. So I think that the approach has to be from civil society wanting, media community taking responsibility, and stopping to play this game, I will not criticize other journalists or other media. I will, because this is not about, this is about the standards of profession. And finally, with all the risks, I think that there is a need for something that is a national strategy, because this is problem that it's not going to disappear without that.
Well, I suppose that when you ask, should we fight against fake news or trying to change those narratives, I suppose we should do both. But I am afraid that small independent media outlets, as, for example, Raskrinkavanje in Serbia or Raskrinkavanje in Bosnia, or any similar outlets in the region, we are not enough, and our efforts are unfortunately limited to debunking fake news. That's something that unfortunately we can do, and that's not enough. In order to change those ideological narratives, I believe that we should there should be the whole society included in that process, institutions and blah, blah. We have to tell each other as a society different stories every single day over a long period of time in order to change wrong beliefs and get out of that ideological mindset that is shaped for decades. And unfortunately, we are not enough, but I don't believe our fight is useless. Because if you think that your fight as a fact checker is useless, you can actually think that every journalistic effort as well, in general, is useless because nothing changes. I think that we are making we are in a way participating in a change that in 2 or 3 or 10 or 50 years we are going to realize that we actually are making a change in this very moment.
When talking about disinformation, it is, as Ilir said, it is not just enough to point the media. What we are facing at the moment are also disinformation that are coming from official sources. So we should be also loud about them. For example, every single month there is disinformation from Russian officials that the West forced Macedonia into force in NATO, which is completely untrue, and it's a false claim. But that point is out there in the media. Going back to our story, what I forgot to mention is that the shares on the social media were done in the period of 3 minutes. That means that we are fighting with somebody and something that is really well organized, right? And this is why I really believe that there should be a much more comprehensive and systematic approach. At least now in North Macedonia, I think that it's doable. But the academia should be involved, media associations as well. New knowledge should be produced. And parliaments should discuss about these issues. It should not be left to the media association and civil society organizations, because it's not enough. So more organized and systematic effort should be put, because at least this is what can do in order to combat the other side, which is pretty well organized.
Thank you. Questions. We have to go to questions now. There's one question there. More questions? Okay, let's go with this one.
It's not a direct question, although it is, but perhaps two suggestions, if I may. It's a question of as to how to prevent it or do next steps. And the gentleman, forgive me, I forgot your name, I think hit the nail together with Tiana. If we focus only on one issue, reconciliation and war crimes, which I think is the root of many, many problems that we all face with disinformation in the region today, we need to be aware of the following facts, I believe. We need to simultaneously work on numerous tracks. The first and most important is to get organized ourselves here in terms of the PR, okay? All the findings, recommendations, assessments, conclusions, news that we are sharing now need to be brought to the public. So I suggest perhaps next time we organize this conference, we actually push much harder to invite and make sure that people who we depend on, who should be our partners in fighting this battle, are here together with us on the stage. So it's not only us who are fact-checkers, networkers, and who are fighting for the cause from one side. We need to make sure that our partners, first of all, media and institutions, first and utmost, the regulatory agencies are here, together, I would say, with the most important part of the public for whom we are all supposed to be doing this, youth. So perhaps there's food for thought. Next time we are to meet and have some similar conference or gathering, I strongly suggest we invite these three groups of people to participate directly in all our discussions and give them a chance to say what they have to say. And if I may add also, I believe, although you have some media coverage of the three-day conference, it would be extremely useful for promoting your messages and your conclusions and your recommendations to have a proper press statement or press conference either before or after the conference to make sure that half a page of the most important conclusions we have come up with are actually shared not only through online media but through TV, because the TV still seems to be the main source of information for most of the countries we all come from. And mind you, the most recent statistics agency report on BIH revealed astonishing, mind-boggling, depressing data that more than 9,000 people in this country are still illiterate, and that over 1 million of people in this country do not use internet.
Very good points. There was another question. Let's take another question there, I think, somewhere.
Is it working? Hello everybody, good morning to all. I have only some remarks and a question. Last week I attended a conference where the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung has presented the results of their study about the youth in the whole of Balkans, and I have seen the results about Montenegro, and they are quite, I would say, depressing, and most of the points that the lady said actually reflected in the study, especially the fact that there is a huge social distance between some ethnic groups. There is also the fact that still not a lot of youth regard online media as to be trustworthy. They still regard TV to be, but what I'm pointing here is that propaganda and fake news is something that in some way or another existed throughout all of our human history. It's something that we won't tackle that easily. It's something that's part of our condition. But what I'd like to ask you, what do you propose, all of you, especially for the youth? What are some of the ways that we can maybe help the youth recognize what are fake news, maybe through some, I don't know, seminars or some training camps or booths, or for example having a separate subject, for example, on online on media literacy or something like that, because I think they are the most vulnerable group when it comes to fake news, because they are easily manipulated. And I would say that, especially in this region, when we have, as the research has shown, that we cannot even trust the public outlets, let alone anything that comes on online. So I would like to ask you, what are some of the ways we can help the youth tackle this burning issue? Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any pressing questions now? More? Okay, that's cool. So I'll let you like do a round. Yeah. There's a question. Okay.
Is this on? Yeah. So good morning, everyone on the panel and in the hall. I have actually one question and one remark. A question is for Tiana about your presentation, about the presentation you made. Can you explain the difference in sentiment between the Trump and the US? Because that caught my attention. How is it possible that many of the articles go well or are positive towards Trump and the same way negative towards the US? I mean, it is possible, but why? Obviously. And the second thing is something that Milica said, I wouldn't agree with, and that is, since we joined NATO, we saw a decrease in NATO-related disinformation. It's quite the opposite, in my opinion, especially now with the 20 years anniversary, and especially now with, not now, but all the time narrative that depleted uranium is killing people, and also the narratives that NATO will open its bases in Montenegro, that Montenegrin soldiers will die. So this is unstoppable narratives that all the time catch the attention of the public, and they go well with the narratives like that we lost sovereignty when we joined NATO, that Montenegro is pushed by force into NATO. So I would say it's quite the opposite, and there is an increase in NATO-related content, both true content and both false one. So, yeah.
Okay, so let's be quick with this round, so just be brief, please.
So the youth question, it's definitely they do need media literacy because they have somewhat good digital literacy, but they're not proficient in understanding what type of content they're looking at. But it should be done right, because I'm saying this because there's very little effort to introduce media literacy in like official education system. And speaking to people from these institutions which are in charge of that, I was rather shocked of how little they themselves understand about that, what media literacy is, and especially what media literacy is today. Because they teach them stuff like, so this was like a silent movie. That was the first type of a movie that was, so they do this, they do like, I don't know, cinematography history, and they do not teach them how to recognize like a fake news website. They leave with zero, even if they have these courses, they leave with zero useful knowledge. So this should be done, and should be done in the right way, in a way that corresponds to the needs of today. And the question of Trump and the US, these are not always the same articles. You have a lot of media reporting that goes just like, gives you this like proverbial America as a threat, but the ones about Trump where he appears as a positive actor, they kind of reflect the deep division that you have within the US, and the deep division that was exploited a lot by these disinformation campaigns around the elections in the US. So it kind of, it's a mirror image of the narratives that, you know, these troll farms or I don't know, internet research agency from Russia would put out there several years ago. And the third reason why this appears this way is because, again, the party of Milorad Dodik, the one that's ruling in Republika Srpska, had a narrative for a while that the sanctions that he's put under by the previous administration, which made them into the ultimate devil in his narrative, are going to be lifted actually when Trump takes over and when, like, you know, his administration takes over. So he was also peddling this division between the Democrats and the Republicans, and that's why they're so different in the sample and why they're not the same. Like, they're not all representing the states. They're really like a partisan politics is reflected in these reports.
Milce, I want to take the...
I wanted to emphasize that propaganda against European Union increased, and I gave my impression, which I still believe it's going down, because I've been working practically solely on following what's going on in communication about NATO for the last 8 years. So that's my impression. To the question about the youth, I'd say, well, at least there are some programs for youth. I'm more worried about other generations that we are not covering, and I would say that the generation of my mom is the victim of the fake news, because they don't understand this concept of new media that don't have traditional editors and so on.
I'm just gonna cut it here because I wanna go into something with Ilir here. Ilir has recently started, well, actually not recently. We've been working also for a while, but recently has been promoted the work on Dr. Spin. Can you just give us a brief introduction what it is? And I think it kind of fits into the answer of some of the questions. So, like, you know, what is it? How is it? Why is it there? And let's show some cartoons to the people later on. Yeah.
Thank you. First, I would like to go back to the question about youth. I think we should not overestimate the capacity of youth to change our societies for one single reason. They have been growing up in societies where things have been looking like this since the day they were born. They have been, not all of them, of course, but most of them, or many of them, have been infested with nationalism since the first day they gained any kind of social consciousness. I remember a case from sitting with a friend. He is helping his kid to learn history, and the kid is reading out loud the textbook. And he reads a sentence about Croatian people of Zagreb, cheering Nazis when they entered Zagreb in 1941. And I remembered the very same sentence I read in my textbook in 1993, when it was popular also to say that Croats were supporting Nazis. So for their entire lives, they are part of this mess. And it's very difficult for them to leave this box of wrong perceptions of reality. And that's why I think it's really still our responsibility, because our generations have not done enough. We have failed, and as they say it, we have failed miserably. One thing I've learned from some other jobs I've had is that when you want to have someone listen to you, then you first need to try and make this point you're trying to make in a relatively communicative way. And now we go back to Dr. Spin. Dr. Spin is the animated series I wrote and directed. It's a 10-episode, 2 minutes per episode series, and it's about a guy whose name is Ernest Spinovic, or as he likes to be called, Dr. Spin. He's a spin doctor, obviously. He was, as he says, advisor to many dictators about most efficient ways of controlling media. So he decided to make this guide for everyone who wants to be a proper dictator as to how to most efficiently kill freedom of media. And that's what the series is about. Yeah.
And for the end, we're gonna just play Dr. Spin. Can we have...
Dr. Spinov, vodič kroz kontrolu medija za diktatore.
Dobro jutro, dragi gledalci. Ja sam dr. Ernest Spinović. Za prijatelje Dr. Spinov, vodič kroz kontrolu medija za diktatore. Dobro jutro, dragi gledalci. Ja sam dr. Ernest Spinović. Za prijatelje Dr. Spin. Vi gledate džepni vodič kroz uzbudljivi svet medijske cenzure i manipulacije.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Okay, so the sound is obviously not right. We have 2 more episodes, so maybe you can try that. Or if not, you can go to Facebook and search for Dr. Spin. You can go to Twitter and search for Dr. Spin. Do that still, please.
And to be mindful of time, let's just like call it a session. And I hope it was a productive session as a first session of Point, and let other people speak also. Thank you very much, and thank you.